situation because you're half an hour, no one knows his job. I understand how my soul works at the post office. And then she looked up his score and said, all except for the score. So I told her, I said, well, at least that's merit-based, at least it's a merit-based situation. He's the eldest son, the one who's not in grad school yet. He's also going back to grad school for just to go back to work for 19 years. So he's, of course, church person, his wife, and second baby away at George Mason. So he's earning a little salary by being with the Mercatus Institute. But they're just eking out his existence there. He's got a year to go.
That is so far away.
All right. Oh, I know FaceTime is about how I can see.
Hey folks, we're going to get started here.
And then,
Oh, good job, Rob. Ready to go. Okay. Okay, well, welcome everybody from Crescent and the surrounding areas. So many great faces in here. Great to see so much representation. State senators, representatives. We've got FEMA. We've got emergency management here. We've got so many people who are concerned about the issues. Thank you. Always being here for Senator Grassley's office. I'm very grateful. So thanks for turning out. We've got so many community leaders here and folks who are trying to address the issues that we're facing related to the flood. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about that. Let me give you a quick overview of some of the work that's going on in Congress as well, because you're also here to hear about some of the other things that are happening in district, with obviously we knowing that the flood issues are still the primary concern, certainly right here. But we're moving agendas forward in Congress to help put more money back in people's pockets, really, quite honestly. And as I told folks who knew me since I've run for this race, I'm here to do two things. Make life better for the people here in this district and represent all of you, whether you're a Democrat, Republican, Independent, or Libertarian. I'm here to make sure that your voices are heard out in Washington. And I mean it when I say it. I truly don't care what letter is behind your name. I'm a fifth-generation Iowan from farm families in Warren County, and my parents grew up saying help others in your community, strangers alike, because when everybody does well, then our community does well. And I'm taking that spirit with me out to Washington to be your voices in a multitude of areas, in particular on Agriculture Committee as well as Financial Services, to make sure that Iowans actually have a voice. And I'll tell you one thing that I've realized, guys, is that, given the fact that we're Iowa, we only have 4 representatives and we don't have the greatest population of some of the other states. You've got to be really loud and proud and stand up for what your state needs, because when there's almost 50 folks representing California, almost 40 representing New York and some of these other big places along our coast, you see why they've been able to get more resources than we have in some cases. But it truly is just a case where I've got to stand up and be the voice of 10 representatives to make sure that we get what we need, which is what I did to fight for that $3 billion of funding for the flood, specially designated to Midwest floods, and then an additional almost $1 billion more in 2 other amendments. So I was thrilled to be able to, make that happen for Iowa. Or whether it's standing up to my own party when we were putting together the continuing resolution. So for those of you who don't know what a continuing resolution is, it's a piece that we put in place in case there's trouble in moving the budget forward for the next year. And right now we're trying to sort out the budget through those appropriations that we're making. And on the House, we've passed 10 of 12 appropriations bills to move the budget agenda forward. We're waiting for the Senate to do their part and make sure that we can finalize that budget. But just in case, we put together what's called a continuing resolution. And that helps us fund government until we get those bills in place. And I got word that, unfortunately, my Democratic majority wasn't going to put in the farm trade aid that our farmers needed in the continuing resolution. So I immediately sent out social media and said, I won't vote for a bill that does not include the trade aid for our farmers. And I whipped up votes from all of my colleagues in our Midwest states to call the Speaker's office and say that you're not going to vote for it. We didn't have enough votes. They ended up putting that trade aid in. So I will always stand up for what Iowa needs. And believe you me, my husband will tell you, I'm pretty loud about what needs to get done. And I'm using these sharp elbows from all that girls basketball here in Iowa to make sure that we get the attention that we need. So in addition to working on things like the flooding and making sure that we get the trade aid that we need, I'm consistently battling what we're seeing from this administration and the EPA's issuance of renewable fuel standard waivers to put more money back in the pockets of rich shareholders for oil companies while taking it out of the pockets of hardworking farm families here in Iowa. And I'm continuing to follow up with the investigation that we've got ongoing into the EPA on those waivers, because this has got to stop. We've got to be made whole. And I'm tired of having the president or someone representing this administration consistently coming out here and telling Iowans that he's going to shore us up and make sure that we get back to selling the same amount of ethanol that we had been selling, and that never happens. So I will keep pushing to make sure that it actually does happen, because I'm not going to rest until we get 15 billion gallons back to 15 billion gallons, because that's what it needs to be. So I'll stand out there and make sure that happens. And when we get back, we're going to be working on lowering the cost of your prescription drugs. So it's one of the pieces that we've been, who doesn't want that? It's one of the pieces that we've been consistently working on. As all of you are aware, we spend way too much money on healthcare in this country, twice as much as any other advanced country. And so a lot of that has to do with how much we spend on prescription drugs. And we're going to be moving forth through the House H.R. 3, which addresses the most expensive drugs within Medicare, and does two things. First and foremost, puts a cap on how much Americans will pay for those drugs, and it can't be any more than 20% more than any other country that we sell those drugs to for. Because all those other countries pay way less for those drugs than we do here in America. And there's no reason that folks should be paying $5,000 a month for diabetes insulin when people in other countries are paying a third of that or even less. And we're the ones who are producing it and have put the money into the research for it. So we're going to be lowering the cost of a bunch of those drugs. That's hundreds of the most expensive drugs within Medicare, but that will also be applied to every other citizen in this country. So we're going to lower the cost of some of the most expensive prescription drugs in this country, and we're going to cap those of you who are on Medicare and your out-of-pocket prescription drug cost at no more than $2,000. I still think that's too high, but at least it's a cap, and it's a heck of a lot lower than what a lot of people are unfortunately paying out of pocket right now. So we're going to continue to push those issues forward so I can continue to be that voice for you of putting more money back in your pockets, whether it's saving it by lowering the cost of diabetes, insulin, or the other drugs that you or your family might take, or supporting trade schools and apprenticeship programs to ensure that every kid or person who wants to be reskilled in this district has an opportunity for a good paying job. So we're going to be working closely through some of the bills that we've crafted to work better with local and state governments and local businesses and K-12 schools to really create a solid pipeline of learning and helping kids get an opportunity to go into a trade school or apprenticeship program that puts them into a good paying job. I'm also trying to make sure that our young people who want to farm have an opportunity. So with my friend Abby Finkenauer, who is our representative on the opposite side of the state, we put together the Farm Act to make sure that we increase the Aggie bonds so that young people actually have an opportunity to get a loan, to invest in property, to buy equipment, so that we can pass our farms on to Iowa kids and your families, because we've got to make sure that we're retaining Iowa farmers. And so I want to let you know that we're working on a lot of issues, but my job first and foremost is to protect the people in this district and do everything that you need to make life better for you. So everything that I focus on is based on that. When the impeachment inquiry came out, what did I do that same day? I dropped an agriculture bill. I made sure that we are increasing the numbers of agriculture inspectors at our borders, because we've got to keep African swine fever from hitting this country. So I wrote a bipartisan bill with my friend Jim Baird out of Indiana to make sure that we increase those numbers of inspectors by about 250 inspectors each year over the next 3 years, so that we can keep this from our shores, because as you all know, there's no solution for it. Our best chance is to prevent it from ever hitting here. Because if that hits here, on top of the trade war, on top of the renewable fuel standard waivers, certainly on top of the folks in this district with all the water that we've had and will continue to see, I don't know how we're gonna survive. So I'm gonna make sure your voice is out there. I am so glad to be on Agriculture Committee, to have a row crop freshman out there making sure that states like Iowa have representation. I'm working on bringing folks here to understand Iowa a little bit better. I brought our leader back and we did a tour of the John Deere plant so he could talk agriculture as well as the impact the trade's having on manufacturing and ag in general. I'm working on bringing back folks from the Energy and Commerce Committee to see our renewable energy opportunities that we have here in Iowa, from second generation biofuels and ethanol to wind energy, and we've got great opportunity for solar. And I truly believe Iowa should be in the lead when it comes to being able to represent new energy in this country. We've got the land, we've got the resources, and we should be getting the economic prosperity from it. So I'm gonna make sure that our voice is always out there. So thank you so much for being here. Let me briefly give you a quick update on the flood. I just talked to the colonel and I wanna make sure I have my notes correct. I just got off the phone with Colonel Hudson on the way in here. So to give you, on the bright side, he left me with the fact that they've received funding for every request that they've had so far. So it means when the Corps is trying to get the funding to close these breaches, they're getting quick, active, fast response. So that's good. But we all know that it's not as quick as we would like it to be. The colonel indicated, and many of you know this, that on the Iowa side, the inlet breaches are closed. But of course, our outlet breaches aren't closed at this time. And the rivers are gonna remain high through mid-December, so we're not looking at any opportunity to close those outlet breaches until the river gets to a reasonable level. So when the river goes back to its banks and starts draining, we're gonna be able to do these things. Contracts are in place, however, to close those outlet breaches. So that the legwork's been done. They've got the contracts in place, they're getting everything set up and workers ready to go, materials and everything, so that when the time comes, they can get out here and get active and get those things closed as soon as possible. He thinks that we will have 611 and 614, which is, by 34, obviously close by, that those should be in the early phase and the first to close before next March. So I wish I could say the first to close before December, but I can't because of the water. But that's the priority, and everything's moving forward in that direction. Then it's 601. I think we were talking a little bit about some of the, it's not in their authority. They've closed the breach on the south side, but not on the north side, because that's being worked at a state level. So we're gonna have to continue to talk with our state reps and senators, and would love some feedback with the folks in this room right now to see what you're hearing on that and what I might be able to do to help press that with the Department of Transportation to get that agenda move forward. And then 594 and 575, obviously the bulk of 575, even though it goes into Missouri, the bulk of it affects Hamburg. And those contracts are being put in place right now, and those are moving forward. So everything is being structured to be taken care of. The unfortunate thing is we can't control the weather, and we all know that. We're gonna see a continually high river, and the inability for the Corps to release as much water out of Gavin's Point as they would like to moving forward, because it puts other communities at risk as well over the wintertime with water and more precipitation. So I just wanted to give you that rundown to let you know that they are actively moving the agenda forward. I couldn't agree with everybody more than I do right now, that we wish this was a heck of a lot sooner. And we do need some help at a state level to make sure that we can get these private breaches taken care of, because that's the biggest issue that we're really facing right now. And I'd like to hear from you all, what I can do, to push that agenda forward, and I'll be happy to call the governor the minute I get in the car, and Paul Trambino after I leave here. So that's a quick update on that. And then for those of you who aren't aware, I recently sent a letter to 8 of the federal departments who deal with flooding, and basically said, where the heck is the darn money? We're getting some of it, but we're not getting it in all the places that we need. We certainly have some hang-ups when it comes to SBA and FEMA. And we've, I think USDA's done a good job of getting, for the most part, what we need, but we still have a little bit more we could be working with them on there. But then again, there's other organizations like Health and Human Services and Transportation that we're getting funding from, and we have yet to see some of that come. So I sent a letter to them this past week to make sure that they're letting us know how much we've received, so we know how much more we have left to go, where it's gone. Who's their best point of contact, anything that they've heard that has kept some of our constituents from getting the resources that they need, so that I can help address that, but really trying to fine tune with them where we're seeing this holdup so that we can actually cut through this red tape and get the money into people's hands. So I will continue to follow up with those agencies to make sure that, that we get some answers to these questions. Last thing before we start, we have questions about that, is that, as I told some folks here, there's no process for this at a federal level, which is really stupid, there you go, and infuriating. As somebody who comes with my whole background's in strategy and processes. It's what I did for a decade at the state, starting with Governor Vilsack and ending up under Governor Branstad. It pains me that across this country, we don't have a process in place to help people who are in dire need and who are hurting and have no livelihood. So we're working on that too. We've actually put together a small group to start creating a disaster relief process. Obviously, there's variables dependent on the kind of disaster you have, but for God's sake, we all know that there's a baseline we could have started to work from, and that's never been put in place. And I think that's what you're going to see out of me and other folks in Congress right now. We know that this isn't just about putting good policy in place, it's also about making sure that the structures and resources we have to support that actually work for the American people. Because right now, they don't. We've got a lot of lawmakers that think that their job is to just put a bill in place. Well, you walk away from that, and there isn't a good opportunity for that information or resources or money to flow out to people who need it. Well, then, what's the point? You haven't finished your job. So we're trying to finish the job and make sure that this doesn't happen again next time. And your feedback and all of these meetings that I've been having with folks to hear about where the cogs are, where we're not getting what we need, is really helpful in defining what's going to be necessary for down the road. So that's a little bit of the update on what's going on with the flood, and I'm here to listen to you and see what I can do to help you with the issues that you're facing.
Question, do you realize that this area has no levee? There's a hodgepodge of farmer levees that are basically washed away. And 5 miles south of here, Omaha and Council Bluffs have a 500-year levee that creates a choke point. So that choke point creates a huge reservoir in the Crescent and Honey Creek area. And with no levees and with no control over the river, we're just getting slammed. In 2006, my son moved back from Oregon to the farm after going to college out there. He built a house. And since then, we've had a flood in 2011, and we've had 4 of them this year. And about 3 weeks ago, he came up to me and said, "Dad," he said, "I'm gonna have to move. And my kids need to go to school. We've got to be able to get to town. We can't farm the farms. So I'm going to have to leave." And this is what's happening here. That people are being forced off of their farms and out of their homes. There's money to build up the interstate. There's money for crop insurance. There's FEMA money. But why isn't there some money to build a levee? And why doesn't the Corps of Engineers start managing those dams for flood control?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. And this is, know, half the battle is exactly what you just mentioned. You know, there's private levies all over the place, and the problem is you know, the Corps doesn't have authority for those. The state doesn't always have enough money or an opportunity to address those issues. So we need a better process whereby, you know, any impact on the levy system, we should be able to come in and fix, even if it is private. We should figure out some type of language where we're gonna be able to have some flexibility in times like this. And right now, there's nothing within the congressional authority that the Corps has to allow us that flexibility. So that's why we're having the problems, and I couldn't agree with you more, and it's unfortunate. And it's one of the things we're gonna have to work on. What I can do is, you know, first and foremost, gonna talk a little bit more with our representatives from this area on the very specifics and see what I can do to work with the Department of Transportation here, get our transportation funding that I was able to get, and also our fish and wildlife funding that we were able to get, which is to shore up some of the, you know, the riverbanks and see if we can use some of this for maybe some of this private work and see what we might be able to possibly, you know, find a loophole to work around or change that language. So I will go back and see what we can do on that.
At a meeting with the Corps in Missouri Valley, they said it would take a 5-year study to figure out what they could do. Is there any way that could be expedited?
I think there is a way that could be expedited, and as a matter of fact, as a result of all this, I started talking with Representative Capter out of Ohio, who's on Energy and Commerce Committee, and she's really active in looking at the Corps' authority. We've got problems all across this country when it comes to the Corps' authority, and we're seeing that whether it's the fires out west or whether it's the flooding here. They're not equipped and structured to deal with the extreme weather issues that we're having today. So we've got to just tear this thing apart. And they know that that's coming. We're going to make sure that they've got proper authority. And that means, you know, combing through the hundreds of pages of documents that they work by, which limits their availability to get things done. But at this point, you know, I'm gonna have to see if we can change some statutory language or something like that to make it work. That's not impossible. I was able to do that to cover the uninsured grain in bins, and hopefully some of you farmers are seeing that money. If you're not, let me know. I fought tooth and nail to change statutory language. That is very hard to do. Even the USDA didn't think I was gonna be able to cover uninsured grain in bins. So I wanted to make sure that happened because I knew our farmers were gonna be in a world of hurt without it. So we can look at things like changing that. It's gonna be a little bit tougher. This, you know, the disaster bill's gone through at this point. We may have to try and change some internal policy, but I can start looking from that perspective. But you're absolutely right. The problem is we're kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place here on what the federal government has given the authority for the Corps to have. And then we've also got private landowners who've done, you know, put up their own levies. And so we've got nobody who has any oversight of those to help fix it. So we've got two problems that don't work real well together. And we've got to figure out the best solution, you know, to make that happen. And it might be good if we, you know, maybe we get a farmer whose levy is breached. We get farmers who are the downside of that, who are getting the water from that or can't clear their land because of that breach levy, and we figure out how we might be, and we get DOT here, and we get federal, we can see if we can get somebody, the right person there, and let's see what we can do. I mean, I think that's the only way we're gonna be able to, is just find an exact example and then figure out how to solve that problem. And see who's got a give and take and where we can give and take for it. I think that's probably gonna be our best bet, is just get on the horn and hash this thing out.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
It's probably 5 years to do this. Well, off at Air Force Base, they're hauling dirt right now, building a levee down there. It's only been a couple of 3 months. They compressed a 5-year study into a couple of months. Plus getting a 404 permit, which is they take a couple of years, we must have got that too. So why can't we get that same thing? That's just ridiculous. And then, you know, and in the 50s when they built those levees down south of Council Bluffs, they had the levees designed from Council Bluffs north clear up to Soldier River. But they put them on the shelf. They said we didn't need them anymore because of the dams upstream. were going to protect us. Well, that didn't work out so good. And those levees were built, they aren't private levees, these were built, you know, farmers,
With a joint effort with farmers.
with the Corps of Engineers back in 52.
Back
But
in the forties.
in the forties, yeah, most of these levees were built in the forties, fifties, and sixties. But the farmers petitioned the Board of Supervisors to establish a levy, and they were trustees of it, and the landowners could vote to be their own trustees of it. So they're not private levies, they are public levies, because those levy districts are a governmental entity. They have elected trustees that go, elected by ballot, they take the same vote the governor and everybody else does, uphold the laws of the state of Iowa. And they have the power to levy funds to maintain them. But those levies were built by the farmers, you know, they petitioned for it to be built. They're government, I mean, they're local government levies, they're not private, so I don't like hearing the word private because that's not accurate.
Well, I appreciate that, and I'm sorry, that's just a
Yeah, I know that.
general term that's used, but the point being, it can't be, federal government can't go in and do anything to those. So that's, you know, we've gotta work with the state and see what we can get figured out.
But those levees were, when they were built, they were adequate to provide protection. And the Corps of Engineer, you know, in fact, they even said, well, you don't even need them anymore. Well, thank God we still got them. And, there's Iowa law, 468-151. Levies or drainage districts, through their governing bodies, are authorized to maintain action in law or equity for the purpose of preventing, recovering damages that may accrue in such districts account for the impairment of their functions or the increase in the cost of maintenance and operation in such districts, or to account for damages of property owned by such districts resulting from the construction or operation of locks, dams, and pools in the Mississippi and Missouri rivers. They may make settlements to justice such damages and written, and use funds appropriated by the Congress of the United States for the increased cost of drainage levy districts and drainage districts. They may agree to the construction and maintenance to prevent equipment and or renew their works, improvements, and equipment and parts for such damages. The means of lessening the damages which could be suffered by such districts. They have a responsibility to fix that. They do not their management of the Missouri River has caused this damage. Iowa law says they have to, they should do, they'll have to pay for it. Why don't they pay for it?
Well, if you want to, I'd be curious to ask our legislators here in the state then, you know, how they're reading that and why this isn't happening. I'll tell you what I would tell you. Listen, I want to see, you know, as this get done as much as anybody. You know, but I think, you know, what you said, well, they're the ones that caused this. There were a lot of causes for this, and we wish that there were other ways that the Corps would manage this, absolutely. The big issue, though, is the Platte River. We've never seen this much precipitation, and it came in from the Platte River for the most part because of the cyclone blizzard. They've released the same amount of water out of Gavin's Point that they have in the past, and yes, we have seen floods. But we saw it so much worse this time because this all happened at the same time. And it really is because of climate change and extreme weather issues that we're facing that we saw so much precipitation dumped on the eastern Rocky side as well as the plains, as you're well aware, during the cyclone blizzard. That all melted into the Platte on top of the massive icebergs that were in the Platte, and everything came at the same time. And they also released at the same time because of the way they're structured. You know, to not hold very much, 4 feet of water up there, they had to let it go. So I agree with what you're saying from the perspective of that there's some responsibility. There's also they won't and really aren't the only reason that this happened. So that might negate the ability to use that law. I guess I'd call on our representatives to, you know, see what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I have a concern, and the first concern is they have modified the channel. They have absolutely modified the channel because of the Endangered Species Act, and the Fish and Wildlife Service letting them, are forcing them to modify the channel to meet the Endangered Species Act. So to say it's the same river, it's not the same river we had when these systems were built. Okay, because they spend a lot of time notching these wing dikes, letting this water, or these rock erode, and they don't ever seem to have the money for maintenance. So this channel has been highly modified. They put chutes in up here. Now they're deciding that the fish does a lot better in Missouri, so a lot of what they've done up here, they're not gonna repair. So to say that he isn't right and what he's saying is right, okay? So I just found out about this law probably when did you tell us about, a month ago or less, 2 weeks?
2 weeks ago.
2 weeks ago? Okay, so they're in the process of working with John, and they're gonna go up and meet with the Attorney General and see what we can do as a state. Sometimes by just, putting this against the Corps, will make them to change action. I will say, in my personal opinion, that the Corps has a mirage of federal laws. If they want something to happen, it seems like they can find the laws to make it happen. If they want something not to happen, it seems like they can find the laws to not make it happen. I've watched this my whole life, and I think that the Corps has responsibility for human life, and I think that some of the programs, there's a new program called SWIFT. SWIFT is a levee safety program that is almost breaking a lot of these districts. I mean, they cannot afford, the 601, as you talked about, that isn't in compliance, that's because of the SWIFT program. That's the thing that they just did bureaucratically to make a levee safety program. Now, the emergency managers can tell that they mostly have plans for county evacuation, but they make each levee have its own plan. Well, they're gonna rely on the counties to do that, and this can cost upwards to $10,000 to $100,000 for these programs. That levee is 6 miles long down there, the 601. They couldn't afford to stay in the program. They don't have enough land mass to make them have the ability to do that. So the Corps has some responsibility here from their own actions of the programs they implement. So I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done and a lot of conversations. And I think sometimes what the Corps tells you isn't always the way it is, but they are creating a lot of this down here and this grief for these farmers because of these programs. Now up here, I do think that the state is going to try to find more funding. I personally wish we could get it done now because it'll be March before we'd be able to appropriate the money. It'll be too late to help them. So I'd like to see that happen sooner. And if any help we can get to make sure the governor understands, we've been trying to explain to the governor, the sooner we do this, the better, that we need maybe to do this. Yeah, so that this might need to be done in a special session. I don't know. Yeah, all right, so.
Okay.
All right, so, I mean, I think that there's a lot that can be done, but I do think that, they have a lot of levees that are messed up out here that have a lot of water yet. Missouri, they haven't even started fixing the levees. We're fortunate from Council Bluffs South that the water's left faster with these exit breaches and they're getting that fixed. I am concerned about Offutt Air Force Base building the current levee around them up maybe 2 feet higher than our levee across the river in Iowa. I mean, how do they get the ability to do that? They're technically supposed to build the levees the same height, so why aren't they paying to fix our levees over there? But then you also have to remember that they bought a lot of ground out there, and they don't manage it like we manage it. We would have had the trees off the land between the levee and the river in the most part. We would have not had the silt build up and the timber out there, which slows the water down. So this channel is highly modified due to actions of the federal government. So I think he's right that the Corps does have a responsibility. And if you told me right, and after the flood of '52, they repaired a lot of these levees out here.
Yes, it did.
So, I mean, they did fix these levees out here before, so.
Can you give me that information? Because I think if we can show, just like you're mentioning, if we can show that they have directed the river in different ways since the law was created, that they've actually influenced it to not operate the way that it needs to, then we might have some leverage.
Well, that's what this says.
Yeah, but can you get that, and then.
But the federal court ruled in 18 months ago in St. Joe, Missouri, that the Corps did lose sight of its purpose. The federal court in St. Joe, Missouri ruled that in March of 2018, that they have basically lost sight of their mission and has become managing the river for endangered species rather than flood management. That was decided in the federal court 18 months ago.
one other thing I was gonna take, as far as trying to fix the levees with their own funds, there's a levee up in Potawatomi County, northern Potawatomi County, Banman Levee. It's got 7,000 acres in it. The cost to build that originally was $54,000, and that's what you can pay in assessments spread over that whole ground on the field pay. So if you charge 200%, you know, in assessment fees to repair, you have to, you can issue warrants and have 20 years to pay them off. So it's going to cost $2.6 million to fix the levee up there. At $108,000 is all they can collect in a year to do that, paying 6% interest. Well, at the end of 20 years, they will, and you start out with a $22.6 million debt. At the end of 20 years, they will have paid $2,160,000 and still owe $4,740,477.07.
Did you win a math contest?
So, I figured it all out. But, yeah.
Down to the penny.
2 penny, yeah.
So,
Well, it's 6.8 cents actually, but I rounded it off.
Yes.
Congresswoman, I want to thank Mr. Reeves here, how you doing, sir? There's a man who's really an example of the suffering that's been going on up here. He was only able to plant about 10% of his crop, lost 24 head of cattle, basically lost 50,000 bushels of grain, and had gasoline stolen from his service station. These are gritty, wonderful people here that are living here and fighting to keep their land. That was good land up until this mess began. And Representative Seek, there's no one more eloquent than Representative Seek and Senator Shipley and Representative Hanusa on what's going on here. What heartens me, Representative, is that John Erickson and I are from different sides of the aisle, but we're very bipartisan in, I think, ascertaining where some of the problems have been and where we need to go, and I believe that he has. John was in on the last statutory revisions that went on with these flood and levee districts, and that section 468, I believe, does raise a threshold due diligence project for potential cause of action against the feds. There are provisions for double and triple damages that were specifically anticipated when that was written. It wouldn't necessarily just be litigation involving the Corps, but perhaps some of the other agencies up there that have not always been terribly cooperative. You have essentially some tortious conduct possibly that did impede and impair those levies from being fixed. And we are meeting, I was just on the phone prior to coming today with Attorney General Tom Miller. He's going to have a bipartisan delegation come visit with him to get some advice legally on Code Section 468, where we might proceed from there.
Okay, if you're gonna, well, I'd like to see if we might have one of my legislative team in on that call. It'd probably be good to have somebody from your office too.
We'll try to have Shipley and Hanusa and Seek and McConkey in on that too.
Okay, yeah, that would be great. Listen,
468 is
And
water
Dawson,
districts, right?
And Dawson, yeah.
Is 468 water districts?
Essentially the.
Because there are some local issues too that
Yeah.
David can bring to
It's,
that, please.
There's two
It's
different
actually levy and
sections.
drain- it's levy and drainage
Yeah.
districts.
Yeah.
There's-
468.
There's two different penalty provisions in there, two separate succeeding paragraphs. One is the double damages and one is the treble damages.
okay, well, if you wouldn't mind talking with someone from our team. Well, you
I
know
just-
how to reach me.
Right, I just like to say that, sometimes the action, threatening the Corps brings action, because at one time, when they put the levee in, they only put one tube in on our farm, it wasn't accurate drainage. So my father decided to sue the Corps of Engineers, so he got this bunch of paper to fill out, and amazingly, before he got the paper filled out, they put a second tube in the next year, so. Sometimes by us as a state or localities threatening, and all of a sudden, like I said before, they find a way to make it happen, so.
Yeah, no, that would be good. Please send that over, we'll start working on that. Second thing, I've already started talking with them about. Half the time it comes down to money, and there should be no reason that money should be dictating fixing these issues as quickly and as possible and in the best way possible. So, you know, I'm constantly having conversations with them about essentially them trying to pick the low cost bid that they get, which might not be the solution that we need. And it's not just here, it's in other parts of our state as well. So that's another piece that we're gonna work on that needs to be changed with them. And that, we do that at the state level too. I mean, we all know that.
Yeah,
I mean, it's always, you know, the low cost bid, sometimes it's not the best. And, you know, I know, listen, nobody's more frugal than Iowans, that's for darn sure. And we all wanna be, but we also aren't stupid. What we do is we invest a little bit of extra dollars if we know it's gonna save us money in the long run. That's how Iowans operate. So what I'm seeing out of the Corps is this always going to the low price, even though by adding 20% more that would reduce our maintenance costs for years to come, they won't do it because they're held to this point. We really need to be looking at this holistically from a long-term local cost and seeing how this all adds up as far as a return on investment.
Or score for experience as well and put that in your computations.
Yeah, exactly. So, all right, I know we've got 2 seconds here.
Couple things. First, thanks for being here. Some of the dynamics with some of the things that have been mentioned. One of the unique things about north of Council Bluffs here is we can all see and hear that the Corps is letting contracts doing this, that, and the other. And it kind of relates to a lot of the comments we have. The problem is up here, we have all public levies ran by districts outside of one in our county, which still is privately owned, that are not in the Corps program, so we don't get access to their emergency contracting, their emergency support, those kind of things like some of the others do. Like was talked about with the SWIFT program that the representative mentioned, it's cost prohibitive for these districts to even try and enroll in these programs because of the standards and the additional cost of this bureaucratic program that they rolled out. So first we have issues right there. The ideas with some of the Iowa code language and working with the Attorney General's office, although you know, I support that because I think there's definitely causation there. These are longer term workouts. And from the emergency management perspective, I have to look at what our people are going through right now and be ready for next spring. And so one thing, and I've had the pleasure of speaking with your staff and you about this, as you go back and look at processes in immediate human impact disaster relief, is there's a lot of money that you helped get appropriated and it was distributed to these different federal agencies, which house the bureaucratic red tape processes that hinder our progress to begin with, like we've talked about. We could do a lot more right now with that money appropriated in a manner to where it comes to a proven, successful organizational and management structure, like through our state flood mitigation board and in our disaster relief fund. For that federal appropriation to come directly to the state so we can make decisions based on our local priorities as opposed to having to just supplement the funding of other disaster relief programs that are out there that already prohibit some of the uses that we need. So, and I know, and again, and I appreciate that we've been able to talk about this, but I'll continue to hammer that one home because we have to look at right now.
I'd agree.
We could jump forward so much faster in this process. Not that we could get it maybe all done by next spring, but if that cut was checked, if that check was cut to our state, to the flood mitigation board, where we can see the state's priorities and the needs of the people and make responsible decisions and move forward, we would be 110% faster, more efficient, and more cost effective running it that way, as opposed to sending it through all these different levels of federal agencies to try and get that filtered down. Because as you know, and what prompted you to make the request by letter to 8 different federal agencies, is we're not seeing that money. It's easy because most of our levies that don't have funding, and just as John described, you can only assess so much, and you still won't have the money to do a simple fix. And then take 20 years of taxpayer burden to pay off something that isn't going to be whole. We could do it now. with that money if it was appropriated in the right place. And throughout the federal system is just not the right place. We've seen it doesn't work. And so I'd encourage all of our federal delegation and our state representatives as well to kind of get behind this push to try and get that money where you intended it to go to begin with, and that's directly to Iowans where it'll impact us. Because it's easy for us to do it that way. They're all predominantly public levies. We can always address the one-off private ones and work out those arrangements. It would ease the burden a ton.
Yeah, let me see what I can do. I'm sorry, I'm like thinking in my head as you're talking on what we might be able to do. And first and foremost, what I'm gonna need to overcome to make that happen. Sure. Because the way things, just like at a state level, things are appropriated through departments because for two reasons. First and foremost, to make sure it goes to the right work that needs to be done. In this particular case, whether it's helping a small business or helping an individual or helping with farm aid, so that it's routed through the right place. And so that also so that there's better tracking of it. So I'll have to see what we can do to figure out what we might be able to get in a pot. It's not gonna be everything, and I don't think you're even asking for all those different, you're talking about some very specific funding that we need to address some of the, those public levy areas on those farmlands and things like that. So let's see if we can, what we can talk, I'm not gonna be able to get, all 3 billion, because first of all, I mean, it was hard enough to get it designated to Midwest floods. We don't earmark anything anymore, so the fact that I could get that in the disaster bill just for this was, that in and of itself was a big feat. So that it didn't get used for floods anyplace else. We may be able to find some percentage of the funding and get it over here by, if we can craft some type of language around, the immediate need, and pull funds from different, maybe from a few different pots and see what we could do. I just don't know what that answer looks like that right now, but I think it's worth exploring, because everything's worth exploring to see if we can get that money here faster. So let's maybe talk, I'll talk with Denise when I get back in the car, my legislative director, who we speak quite a bit with the folks out here, and see what her thoughts are, and we might want to get like a little bit, do some legwork, and then have that conversation. But that's another good idea. Okay. All right, last question.
Just real quick too, and you and I have talked, and my son lost his home in Hamburg. He's hearing communication from government is crazy. He's hearing anywhere from 1 year to 5 years before he has buyout money. And so communication for one, and what is the true answer when you send out the letter for funding to find out where the funding is, when's the buyout coming through? I mean, we talked, a fire, a tornado, people, insurance steps in and they're getting their lives back together right away. A flood comes through and we're talking months, if not years. So when's the funding coming through for buyouts?
Okay. So we'll go back and, you're catching all this, Caleb? Somebody's always typing something to go on. Okay, all right, well, thank you for that. Yeah.
If I could just say, I'm with Iowa Legal Aid, and if you are having any problems with buyout issues, please try to contact us. We can help people sometimes if they're over our general income guidelines. So we're here as a resource, and you can talk to us. We have special disaster funding for that. So it might be something where he could give us a call, and I would say that open that up to everybody. There's also an unmet needs committee for Pottawatomie County, Fremont County, and Mills County. And those are committees that have funds that can help people that are not getting their needs met in other ways. And Doug Reed could talk a little bit more about that, so you might reach out to him for Pottawatomie County. There's a number of us here that are part of human service providers, that are part of the Human Services Advisory Council, that has a disaster committee that's been trying to work on a lot of these issues. So feel free to chat with me afterwards too, if you'd like.
Well, I know we're hitting the road. I want to thank first and foremost everybody for coming out today, and thank you for all the work that you're doing. And I know all of our other reps and senators, we've all been talking, the best day will come when we don't have to talk so much about this, right? Not that I don't wanna see you, but, we don't wanna be talking about the fact that we can't get the funding to the people who need it. So we'll take these ideas, I really appreciate it. As I tell everybody out there, literally the smartest people in the world are from Iowa, and then I always say my district. Because exactly what you just brought, and you're helping your state reps and your federal to say, here's this piece in law that we could possibly use. And truly, that's who Iowans are. They always find an opportunity to make life better, and they don't stop until they get to those answers. So thank you for that. And I know we need to go, and I know another topic we didn't get to was USMCA. So as I leave, I want to tell you where we're at with that, 'cause I know we've got a lot of people in this district concerned. It's coming together very well. I just got off the phone last night with the chairman, Richie Neal, who's head of Ways and Means, who was on his way up to Canada to meet with the president again to continue to finalize the regulatory oversight pieces, which is the only piece missing about from USMCA right now. As I've told folks all along, agriculture's looked good for a long time, manufacturing's looked good. We had two pieces to figure out, the biologics pharmaceuticals piece, as well as labor and environmental regulatory oversight. The biologics pharmaceutical piece is coming together really, really well. We're almost there. This is the opportunity for us to be able to negotiate the things like diabetes and Humira. Basically, biologics are drugs made from human genomes. So they constitute a major portion of expenses in this country. And one of the things that this agreement did that NAFTA didn't do was include intellectual property, and in particular about development of drugs in this country. And to cover that, which is a great idea, we need to do that. Problem is, the way that it was written wouldn't allow us to negotiate the cost of those really expensive drugs. And as I mentioned to you earlier, we're trying to pass policy to make that happen. So we can't have a trade agreement that locks up negotiating with big pharma while they hold patents for a decade and continue to expand that. That keeps us from being able to lower the cost of prescription drugs, because we have to have 3 generics on the market to force competition. So we're getting really close to getting that biologics pharmaceuticals piece done. Everybody's really happy about where that is. I think we'll see that done in the next 2 weeks at the most. The regulatory oversight's coming together really well. I just met with the ambassador to Mexico, the Mexican ambassador the other day, and I had her show me the numbers for how they're increasing the numbers of labor inspectors, so to speak, to ensure that work conditions are appropriate. They're increasing the numbers of folks who will work on cases related to labor to make sure that those workers have good representation. So they're increasing FTEs, or full-time equivalents as we call them here in Iowa, across the board to make sure that we can have good regulatory oversight. That piece is coming together very well. And as I've told folks, I would have voted for this ages ago if we could have pulled out agriculture and done that separately. But here's why it's so important that we finalize this the right way. If we have appropriate regulatory oversight for labor standards in the countries that we negotiate, that we trade with, Canada and Mexico being 2 of our largest, we're not saying have the exact same stuff, but you gotta have something put in place. If we don't, what it means is they will always undercut our pricing here, and that means we'll outsource jobs. It also means when their workers don't get paid well, they're coming to America to get better pay. We want other countries that we do trade with to do well so that they can support their citizens and keep jobs in their country and not undercut our pricing, so we can pay our producers and our manufacturers here for the products that they produce the appropriate rate, and we don't lose economic opportunity as a result of it, and so that we can also continue to pay our workers in this country well, and that they don't undercut that so that we outsource jobs. One of my biggest priorities is to keep jobs here in America, which is why I wrote the Outsourcing Accountability Act, because I'm sick and tired of seeing these big corporations sending jobs out overseas and other countries because they can get it done cheaper. Well, we've got to start leveling that playing field and keeping good paying jobs here in America. So that's why it's so important that we get this figured out. This is going to be a vastly better bill than NAFTA. I appreciate the work that the administration has done on it, and then in conjunction with both Democrat and Republican working groups to finalize the language. It's gonna be a really good bill for our entire country that we won't have to open up for a long time. But just like anything good, it takes a little bit longer than you want. But we have every belief that, and I know Senator Grassley's been heavily involved in this conversation because his name's come up multiple times as where, well, what's Grassley saying in the House? Same thing, we're getting close to an answer, we're getting close to a solution. We just gotta fine tune that piece and make sure that we can move that forward. So I'm gonna do everything I can to continue to be a big voice on that. Everybody knows how important USMCA is to this state, and I will continue to push that agenda. But if you have any more questions, please feel free to reach out to our office. I gotta go, I'm so sorry, but usually I'm running on 15-minute increments, so this was a luxury time. So thank you so much, everybody, really appreciate it. Thanks for all your good community. I love it. That's my focus. And
As that now is going public, and you're at least going to be zoned in a little bit more on it, what are you looking to hear on some of these hearings that are going to be coming up in the coming weeks?
Well, I think it's an opportunity for people who have been involved with or serving in the administration. Is getting a message from a national security perspective to get that information out to light. The number one job that I have outside of representing my district is to defend our country. And so we've got to have all the information that we can get to make sure that our elections aren't tampered with, because only Americans should be influencing who wins, and that we protect our national security. So I think we'll be finding a lot of information to help us with those issues.
How much that has already came out, whether it be from the president or from what's came out in news outlets, have already concerned you about what you did?
Well, the president self-admitted that he asked the Ukrainian president to dig up dirt on a political opponent. That in and of itself is an abuse of power and possibly a violation of the Constitution. He also knew that it was quid pro quo, and that has been stated numerous times by the folks who we have a president who not only asked a foreign entity to intervene as a opponent, but then he as a threat. So that gives our country extreme danger. We can't ever have any president, I don't care rural office that believes that we can hold out funding for our allies around the world to help them with their political opportunities. We can't have somebody serving in the Oval Office. So we gotta get to that.
So what you just said seems like you already have a lot of details down. Is that impeachable?
Those acts are impeachable. I mean, it was quid pro quo. You cannot, first and foremost, the president doesn't have the authority to withhold congressional funding. That's why we have three distinct branches of government. Secondly, he self-admitted that he asked a foreign entity to intervene and get involved in our political process. That's an abuse of powers. And certainly quid pro quo is a violation of the Constitution. So we'll gather all that information and we'll see what those
I want to switch back to flooding. It seemed like in the conversation we had earlier, one of the biggest parking was the high flood. What can we do to get our flood
obviously, one of the issues that we're facing here is there is no good process of pathway for the federal government to work straight down with the farmer, whoever is the landowner who has that levy on their property. And unfortunately, how we craft laws sometimes disables the federal government from making that happen. So what we need is a more flexible law, because we've got folks and levies that the courts should be fixing or would have fixed earlier than they have, but we still have water coming down from some of these private and or locally public levies. So how does that help our system when we're not able at the federal level to do what needs to be done because we don't have the resources at the local level? That means we need to be more flexible at the federal level to be able to look at the picture holistically and not just where the authority lies to get this job done.
I know there were a lot of are you not concerned with the fact
Absolutely, I'm concerned. You know, we are facing extreme weather patterns on a consistent basis. We know that we're going to have it's supposedly going to be a much wetter winter again. We already know that there's a lot of water that needs to be released, and we're going to have a difficult time releasing that along with all the precipitation we're going to get and have the opportunity to keep these communities safe. It's going to be a real balance, and I don't know how well we're going to be able to stay protected. We've already seen this since the flood happened. We've seen 29 closed, open and closed because we've had water released and more rain. The unfortunate thing is, with the system set in place, it takes too long to fix these issues. And we've never seen this many levees blown out at the same time, and there's a lot of work to do. So we're in the process of fight tooth and nail to get every dollar here to get it done as quickly as possible.
Is your core focus, not necessarily your core focus, but one of the things you really want to get done is to fix the system?
Oh, absolutely, I want to fix the system. My core focus is to make everybody whole first and foremost, and that's why I'm out here today, to listen to the stories and talk to the people who've been impacted and see where we're at. And it's why I wrote every single agency involved with disaster recovery to say, give us the money, show me the money, because we're getting some of it, but it's not coming as fast as it can. Gosh darn it, I worked way too hard to get $3 million in there and change statutory language to cover uninsured freedom farms and all of these things for them to be sitting on this money because we've got red tape. So two things, make them whole, but here, absolutely we got to fix the process. I've realized that not just with this, but so many other things in Congress, the process is what's bogging the system down and keeping us from reaching intended outcomes that would be a good use of taxpayer dollars. So we've got a lot to fix. I'm glad to be out there. That's where I come from, a background of fixing processes, and we're going to keep moving forward with every issue that we face so that it doesn't happen again.
When you're talking about fixing the process, you know, what is especially coming down next spring, that's not a process, but otherwise, what can you do between now and then benefit realistically to get the made, get the money down here?
Well, first and foremost, just keep applying the pressure to get the money down here and actually and ensure that we're going in and getting those answers. Secondly, we came up with a couple of ideas today that I'm going to try and see what we can do at a federal level to coordinate with the state level, where we might be able to be more flexible within the language of the disaster bill to find an opportunity to put more money in the hands of the people who are directly here on the ground and not just coming straight from the department. So we're going to look into that. We're going to look into seeing if changes along the river, then maybe because of the federal government and the Corps in particular has altered it to the degree where our state language would make it responsible for the federal government to take care of this issue. So I'm going to see what we can do, dig into the policy and see if there's an opportunity to find a space in there, a loophole to fix this issue and get money out.
Do you think ultimately the Corps should be doing instead of having numerous levers over by 11%?
Well, I think we absolutely need to look at the entire system of water that's impacting flooding along the Missouri or other parts of the state, because we're seeing it in other parts as well, and make sure that we're looking at this holistically. My goodness, we all know we've got a ton of water running through Iowa, so we can't just think about the end point where it all converges. We've got to think about what's feeding into it, and if the impact at the federal level is caused because of other things feeding into it that are locally owned, then we're going to have to think about how we craft policy that incorporates all of that.
Simple question, where does the money stay? I realize it's more complex than that, right? What specifically was appropriated and where is it stuck?
Well, that's what we're trying to get to. So here's the deal. We were able to get $3 billion appropriated in a multitude of departments, from USDA to FEMA to small business to health and human services to transportation, fish and wildlife. So the issue is within all of them, they all have departments then that deal specifically with this. Now I'll look at USDA. They're doing a pretty darn good job of getting the funding out. So they're really moving in this capacity. They deal very specifically with farmers and anybody who owns agriculture, or is in that economic stream. They're doing good. Some of our other places, we're not getting the funding as quickly as we would like, or we're seeing laws that don't work for Iowa. When the SBA says you've got to be paying back a small loan within 6 months and it's going to take you longer than that to be rebuilding, how the heck are you able to take out a loan and then pay it back? And business coming in. So those are all those little issues where money's being hung up because of that. So we might have set money aside, but the way they crafted policy is keeping us from getting it. That's one issue. And then of course the other issue is just lack of the ability to move things through the system quick enough. And, I'm going to hold government accountable for getting that done.
Not really. Trying to see a payout. There's a recent study out of Washington that's showing that it takes an average of 5 years of the whole process to get disaster recovery.
Yeah, oh, absolutely, we need to look at that. I'll tell you one thing, first and foremost, we cut that down. As FEMA said to me earlier, we got FEMA into this district quicker than most disasters. The fact that I was able to get us into a disaster bill with that amount of money, literally at the last minute as it was moving through the House, and so many folks said, do not try and get in there because you're going to mess with everybody's going to be upset because you're going to push the system back. No, we just got in there and I was dogged about making sure we made it, or else we could be sitting here, just like you're saying, waiting for another disaster bill to go through if we hadn't got through on that. So we've already cut that time down, but we've got to be quicker when it comes to this because this isn't going away. We're seeing disasters across this country, and we've got to start being able to help people much more quickly.
Something around there?
Yeah, my pleasure. Okay. There we go. Thanks for coming out, keeping your eye on all this. All right.
The car over by.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, okay.
David Dion, did you ever interview him in previous conference?
No, I just
He got elected in 2014,
Okay,
and he won 2 terms, and then he lost a year ago.
okay.
He lost by 9,000 votes. I was the Libertarian Party nominee. I got 7,000 votes.
Okay.
But there were 3 other independent candidates, so the Republicans sort of consider us spoilers of the election. And David's running as a primary because he wants to take on Steve and he wants to rematch. Thank you. It's Molly, right?
Nice to meet you. Call me if you need anything. Call me directly and I'll get you on to, I'll get the first one. The general meeting, yes, it's nice for Thanksgiving, like we, it's not the day before Thanksgiving. We don't want to do that. A lot of people have places to go. So it's the team, whatever the team week is,
Yeah, I do too.
I can't imagine your schedule. It'll be great. We would love
Somehow, I trust the Roman engineering better than our people. You know, some of those aqueducts and roads have lasted for millennia.